Hello and welcome back to episode 17 of the Boxing Social podcast in association with Betfred. With me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. Delighted to be joined today by boxing writer, author, aficionado extraordinaire, Paul Zanon. How are you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for turning up today on short notice. I'm sure we'll get into it in a little bit, but you've saved us for a little bit of a pickle. But before we get started, just to remind everybody that today's Boxing Social podcast, as with all of the others, will be available on Spotify, iTunes, and if you could just like, comment, and subscribe, you won't miss out on any of the future ones. Anyway, now we've got that out of the way, Paul, thanks very much for coming down at, I'd say short notice, but no notice at all. Unfortunately, myself and Adelaide managed to get our wires somewhat crossed, but you've managed to help us out at the last minute. So thank you very much for popping along today. I really appreciate it.
No, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Right, before we get going, I guess we've got a packed schedule today, as we usually do on the podcast. Busy weekend last weekend. We've got a busy weekend coming this weekend. But before we talk about that, let's talk about you, considering you've popped down and graced us with your presence. Just give people a little bit of a background. Obviously, the Boxing Social hardcore and the boxing fans, the boxing hardcore fans, will be very familiar with your work, such as we've got like a Paul Zanon tribute pile here. So we've got The Ghosts of Johnny Tapia available now. And we've also got Morsey, Jamie Moore's biography. See, I'm doing your job for you here, but it's okay. Another biography written by the man himself, Paul. So, Paul, talk to us a little bit about your story, what you do, where you come from.
So I'm someone who failed GCSE English about 3-4 times. So couldn't really sort of spell, read, or write that well, and then ended up becoming a writer. So that's a natural progression there, obviously. I've written 8 books, got another couple in the in the making. Started writing for Ring magazine recently, which I'm really excited about, especially after the late great Boxing Monthly folded up. And that's it. But yeah, apart from that, I've been very lucky to write autobiographies to the likes of Jimmy Tibbs, Martin Murray, Jamie Moore, and a few others. And I'm really looking forward to getting stuck back into in-depth boxing writing as we start to sort of emerge from the pandemic. And but in the meantime, I get to hang out with lovely people like you guys and be part of the Boxing Social podcast. So living the dream. Yeah,
I mean, it's not the first time that you've been on a podcast on Boxing Social, but the first time you've been on the Boxing Social podcast. You, of course, do Below the Belt with Callum. We do a very good job with him very regularly on there. Also available on Boxing Social. Do check that out. But yeah, you make a good point there about kind of getting back into the swing of things. You are, of course, working on the new Boxing Social magazine out for, I'm not supposed to tell. Okay, May the 3rd it's going to be out. We're not going to tell you what it's about yet, but the new Boxing Social magazine will be out May the 3rd. But yeah, good to get your teeth back into. I think everybody at the minute is kind of chomping at the bit to get back into things after the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of... It's more fear of the unknown, I think, than anything else. And the time frames, everything that sort of came with the pandemic has just thrown everyone into a loop. So slowly, as herd immunities build up and the vaccines seem to be working effectively, normality will hopefully be in the same sort of slipstream of positivity moving forward. So I cannot wait to be sitting ringside, getting splattered with the sweat and blood and everything else that comes with those experiences, and also catching up with the old boxing fraternity again. It's been great doing it on phones and Zoom calls and whatever else, but being there, seeing people in person, it's just totally different. It really is.
Yeah, I always say the same thing to people in the last few months in particular, as we've kind of hopefully emerged from the worst of things. Like, it's nothing against doing Zoom interviews and stuff, but when you're close face to face, can look into somebody's eyes, get their story from there, it makes it so much more real, doesn't it? So that's one of the things that I'm definitely looking forward to as well. Okay, anyway, after the intro, we've got to skate through this because we are running behind now. Completely my fault and Ade's fault if he's watching. Let's talk about this past weekend before we come on to this weekend's action. Denzel Bentley versus Felix Cash. Resounding win for Felix Cash. Really, really impressive in a fight that a lot of people were billing as 50-50, or certainly a very well-matched fight beforehand, but a dominant win for Felix Cash.
Yeah, I mean, big guy, 6'1". Looked like, I don't know what sort of weight he actually came into the ring at, but he was sculpted. I mean, from the get-go, he was letting the bombs go, but he wasn't just throwing them willy-nilly. It was behind a very, very clear game plan, and I'd really like to see him move up to that European title, but if he doesn't, just looking at the top 10 contenders at the moment within the middleweight range, I mean, Liam Williams, that could be bombs away. Chris Eubank Jr. There are, when I start going through from 1 to 10, but there's some great fights to be had there. Heffron, etc. Felix Cash, where can you go in terms of the entire sort of range of belts? I would like to see him go for that EU belt because he's got the British, he's got the Commonwealth, he's doing things the traditional way, and then work his way up to a world title of some sort. But very, very impressive, emphatic win for him. And he did what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to take Bentley out, and he said probably early rounds.
Yeah, it was very impressive. He hurt him in the first round. He caught him with that kind of check left hook that staggered Bentley back to the corner, and he really didn't let up. I don't think he really allowed Bentley into the fight at all. I think I commented on it on the Sunday by saying it was above a British title level performance. I mean, you're kind of talking about the European or fringe world level. It seemed to me like very much on that kind of, that standard. It wasn't what you would, customarily expect to see in a British title fight. Mark Heffron, very capable fighter. We saw the first fight with him and Denzel Bentley. He was in the second fight, admittedly got stopped because of the eye injury. But yeah, really, really impressive performance. Sorry, should have turned my phone off just like you did before we got started. But really leaves me kind of wondering what's going to happen in the future. We saw Frank afterwards say, I think because Liam Williams vacated the British title, he has some sort of rights as an ex-champion, kind of like we see with the emeritus champions and moving back. Not really sure I can see Liam Williams necessarily going into that fight, not through obviously any fear of Felix Cash, but just give a good account of himself in a world title fight against Demetrius Andrade. I'm not sure that is going to necessarily be on his radar, a Felix Cash fight, but that would be a brilliant fight.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to Andrade after the fight. I mean, all the stick and the verbal insults they were volleying at each other. One of the first things he said afterwards was, Triple G, Canelo, all you guys out there, he's worth a shot. Give this man a go. And I think Liam Williams has proved that he can mix at world level. He got bashed up for the first 3 rounds. Well, actually, the first 2. The third round.
The first minute of the first round was real torrid, wasn't it?
Yeah, it looked like it was going to be a bit of an embarrassment in terms of another Englishman going over or Englishman and Welshman for all the Welsh fans out there. Big fan of Wales. But in the third round, he came back. Although you couldn't really hear it if you were listening to the American DAZN commentators because they were a little bit biased. But he clubbed him. He clubbed him good. And then from then on, he got the confidence back and he turned it into a real fight. So I don't think Andrade was expecting anything like that. So I think that's probably why he was paying tribute to Williams afterwards and saying this man deserves another shot at the title. And to say that he will become world champion one day as well is fantastic. So hats off to Liam. The only way that Liam's going to want to fight Felix Cash is, no pun intended, if there's a lot of money involved in it. And if it is, then he'll fight anybody. So, exciting time, really exciting time. Very good for British boxing. And particularly the middleweight division.
Yeah, I agree. I think with regards to Liam Williams next, he's also been talking about potentially European title. Barry Jones, another one of our kind of part-time podcast co-hosts, was talking the day after the fight or a couple of days after the fight about, in his opinion, it showed the gulf between British and world level. Maybe Williams could have taken that European step next. I know he got the win over Alantez Fox, who's a world-rated opponent, but the traditional route, as you mentioned about Felix Cash, Liam Williams not having that pit stop, if you will, at European level, maybe showed against Andrade, who it's difficult. He still does sort of flatter to deceive a little bit, Andrade. A lot of what he does is very, very good, but he did allow Williams back into the fight in certain instances. But Liam did give a very good account of himself. And as you mentioned, kind of without a big lorry load of money on the table, is he going to want to risk it against somebody like Felix Cash, who's still making his way up in the division? Sticking with Felix Cash, another great win for Tony Sims. Tony Sims at the minute producing great win after great win. We saw the work that he's been doing with Conor Benn recently. John Ryder's obviously improved dramatically. Yeah, Tony Sims is kind of the man of the moment in the training game.
Yeah, he really nice guy. He's been around a lot of big names. He's also been one of those guys who's been in the background a hell of a lot of the time. And with Rob McCracken being the main name for Joshua in terms of his trainer, Sims had a hell of a lot to do in terms of Joshua's successes there. Taking a little step back to what you said about the European titles, I know that Tony Sims really wants that European title fight as well to happen, and he said it the other day, let's not sort of leapfrog here and start talking about world title fights. And talking about the validity of that fight as examples, when Cheeseman fought against Garcia for the EU title, Garcia came out with phenomenal performance. And if they'd have just sort of said, let's go for the world title and intercontinental, so now that fight wouldn't have happened. You take Josh Kelly. Again, fantastic fighter. I mean, he lost against a very good European champion. So I think it's good that people work through the gears. I think it's needed that people work through the gears because it adds validity. But more than anything, it proves to themselves that, yes, we can actually validate the stamp to say you're good enough to go for a world title fight here, as opposed to many others who have suddenly leapfrogged and then end up by getting smashed in 2 rounds. So...
Yeah, I mean, that's why you still, albeit in a kind of a modern era of international belts, intercontinental belts, you still hear a lot of wise heads and a lot of knowledgeable trainers and indeed fighters, managers, promoters talk about the traditional route and that classic area level English title, British title, Commonwealth, European, world. But we're seeing it. I mean, Conor Benn is kind of an example of that, albeit trained by Tony Sims as well, where he's kind of circumvented the British title level in the domestic scene by going the international route, and I think he's got the WBA Continental or something there. But I do still see the value of the traditional route, and I think we're seeing that really, and I think that was a good example of it with Liam Williams. If he could have potentially had like not necessarily a Sergio Garcia versus Ted Cheeseman night, because that wasn't great for Ted, but somebody of that kind of standing to test the waters before going in against somebody like Demetrius Andrade, I think would have been helpful for him. Moving on this past weekend, we saw the return of Callum Johnson, kind of the forgotten man of the light heavyweight division over the last few years. We've had Joshua Buatsi, Anthony Yarde, Lyndon Arthur, etc. But good to see Callum Johnson come back, and he's always in great fights. It was only 2 rounds, but there was enough action in there for an 8 or a 10 rounder.
I'm a big fan of Callum Johnson. I had the pleasure of interviewing Artur Beterbiev at the beginning of last year, and I was going through the English crop in terms of who he might fancy, and it was kind of like, right, let me run them past you, Anthony Yarde, and he was like, Anthony Yarde, he lose against Kovalev. Next, who else? And I was like, okay. I said, you've got Joshua Buatsi. He says, yes, he looks good prospect. And then I said, Callum Johnson. He said, Callum Johnson, good fighter. And he basically went on to say, he said, if I was going to rematch anyone that I'd fought of all my fights so far, I'd give Callum Johnson the rematch. Because he obviously, he caused him problems, and maybe wants to avenge the fact that he made him hit the canvas, So, but I think Johnson's a little bit away from getting in there with the likes of Beterbiev straight away, and the Bivols and whoever else. But he's been out for so long, we need to see more Callum Johnson again. For his sanity, obviously, but also I think for the fans who have seen what he can do, and that 2-round destruction there was just. I think it was just unleashing a lot of venom that he had in a tank built up over all those months. So let's get Callum Johnson now on the regs, as they say, and hopefully he can start to work through the gears and build his way up to a world title shot again.
I liked your Russian accent. I thought we had Al Siesta back in here for a little minute there.
Yeah, I watch a few Russian movies, so a bit of gangster stuff. Yeah.
One thing that is worth pointing out, we mentioned kind of a 2-round destruction, really. I mean, he really did let the hands go, particularly in that second round, but he was caught by a very good right hand in the first round by Emil Markic, which, no fighter wants to get hit, but when you've been out of the ring for a couple of years, it's not the worst thing in the world to know that you can still take a shot, and he really did have to take one because he caught an absolute perler from Markic, almost put him over in the first round. So it's kind of a box ticked, albeit, I'm sure he probably ideally wouldn't have taken that right hand, but still a good thing to come through.
He's a bit overeager. He wanted to go in there, make a statement. It's his first fight in a long time, so he was chomping at the bit. But listen, Callum Johnson's got great boxing skills. When he went in against, he was going in against a guy who wasn't Artur Beterbiev, and when he went in against Beterbiev, his defence was far better, and his counter punching was far better in those early rounds as well. So I think it depends on who's in front of him. He thought he might have the possibility to knock this guy out in a round, but didn't happen that way. But certainly did in the second round.
You mentioned not necessarily throwing him in at world level yet. I think that's smart considering the layoff that he's had, and admittedly Emil Markic not what we consider a stellar opponent, even though I think he came into the record with 31 wins and 1 loss or 2 losses or something. But where would you like to see Callum Johnson go next? Obviously Lyndon Arthur was there, Anthony Yarde, I mentioned Joshua Buatsi. Who would you like to see him in with next?
I think Lyndon Arthur would be the best one for me at the moment. I think Buatsi might be a fight or 2 away, but after Lyndon Arthur's jab perfect performance against Anthony Yard, I think that'd make for a great fight. I think Callum Johnson's possibly got the skill set, the toolkit to be able to get into past that jab and cause some problems. But Lyndon Arthur's a wily fighter. He's got some lovely little sneaky lean backs that he does. He's got some lovely little counter hook punching capacity in him as well. So for me, I think that could potentially be quite a explosive chess match.
Where does that leave Anthony Yard?
Anthony
He's in
Yard.
He's in a little bit of limbo at the minute, isn't he? I mean, we've obviously not seen him box since Lyndon Arthur. He was supposed to box on that card and share a bill with Callum Johnson, which kind of indicates that there's potential for those two to be matched up. Of course, obviously now both under the Queensberry banner, but interesting to see where he goes next. I think it's fair to say the opponent that he was due to box on this card was probably a way away from the likes of Sergey Kovalev and indeed Lyndon Arthur. But yeah, interesting to see where he goes next.
I think there's always space for Anthony Yard. If they were to say Anthony Yard against Joshua Buatsi coming your way soon, that'd be a great fight. Anthony Yard was not that far away from stopping Kovalev. He just ran out of gas. Simple as that. And maybe the occasion got to him. Maybe just he didn't have the stamina that particular out. Whatever it was, but he was close doing it. But Anthony Yard still brings the heat, and he's a lovable guy. He's always in great shape. And whether he fights against Callum Johnson, has a rematch with Arthur, or fights against Joshua Buatsi, all three of those fights are fights that we need to see.
Yeah, and because of, I think, the way that he's carried himself throughout his career so far, and you mentioned the fact he's always in good shape, he's always going to be watchable. He's always going to bring a lot of eyes to the sport and bring a lot of eyes to his fights. So you mentioned any of those three fights are great fights. I would like to see Callum Johnson versus Anthony Yard, because I think both of them would just go straight forward. Whereas I do also like the style matchup of a Callum Johnson versus a Lyndon Arthur. You've got the aggressive come forward fighter against the more traditional boxer in Arthur. But yeah, I think there's some exciting fights for Anthony Yard in the future, as well as the rest of those light heavyweights. I think it's a really blossoming scene. Finally, on the Warren show this past weekend, we saw British boxing with another judging controversy. David Adelaide versus Camille Sokolovsky. Now, a lot of people in the know in the sport who follow the sport closely know that Camille Sokolovsky is not somebody to be played with. Very, very capable fighter. Exactly the type of fighter where you don't necessarily look at the wins and losses on the resume, but more who he's been matched against. I felt, as did the vast majority of viewers, that he was unlucky not to get the win over David Adelaide. What did you think?
I had Adelaide about 3 rounds down by the end of it, and to be honest, there was a case to say that he'd lost all 6 rounds. I've been ringside for Sokolovsky, and he's 6'1", and the height difference is something that he's used to pretty much at heavyweight, and his techniques and his footwork to get into that range always works. He's been in with big names, Nathan Gorman, just to mention one. And he's been on the rough end of a stick on a number of occasions. I think, to be honest, from about the first minute and a half, he laid down the foundations of how the fight was going to go. And unfortunately for his opponent, he wasn't able to lock into his rhythm. It was off timing. It was just purely relying on the big right hand, which, to be honest, the best punch he released came in about the last 10 seconds of the fight, which if it had been halfway through the round, he might be able to finish him off with a bit of follow-up. But that was the issue as well. It was single shots. There was no combinations in there. You're a taller man, you're 6'4.5". Step in, try and unleash some hooks, try and get some uppercuts going. He was primed for the uppercut. It was all night long he could have thrown that. But Sokolovsky was just too wily, too active, too suffocating. So I think the decision was wrong.
We've seen a lot of talk recently, particularly in kind of COVID era of boxing, about matching and matchmaking. If you look at David Adelaide's last opponent before he boxed Camille Sokolovsky, I mean, admittedly it was a last-minute replacement because his opponent fell out, but he boxed a debutant and he looked every inch a debutant when he was in the ring. And you go in from Dave Preston, the debutant, to Camille Sokolovsky, and anybody who knows boxing knows Camille Sokolovsky is no easy touch. You're going from here right up against it, and it looked like that what we saw in the ring. We saw David Adelaide look a little bit out of his depth in there. You know, he didn't set up his shots behind the jab. Again, as you say, looking for single shots, allowed Camille Sokolovsky to force the action. He was reactive. He wasn't necessarily forcing any of his own work or pushing forward with his own work. Quite a worrying performance. I think obviously he came out of the fight with the win, controversial as it was, but a lot to work on there for David Adelaide in the future. And it's kind of interesting to see where he's going to go next. I know David Hay after the fight was talking about the Sokolovsky rematch. I don't necessarily think that's something he should be entertaining straight away. I think he needs to go back to the drawing board. But yeah, not a great decision. And again, it's something that we're seeing an awful lot at the minute. We saw, as we'll come on to shortly, the officiating in Spain the night before on the Friday in some of the bouts there, the Leharaga Jez Smith fight, the Gavin McDonnell fight. There was some interesting calls. But in the UK, it's happening an awful lot now. And I think the most disappointing thing about for me, with regards to Adelaide Sokolovsky, is that we could see it coming. Even though I gave Adelaide 2 rounds and I felt like I was being quite generous. But even still, I kind of expected him to get the decision, which is a bit of a damning indictment on the officiating over here.
Yeah, absolutely. The main issue there is that if Adelaide had got a loss, then he'd have to work out how to bounce back from it. There's a lot of pressure with the heavyweights. Everyone wants to see the big destructive guy steamrolling everybody, and some people in the early fights can do that. Daniel Dubois as an example. Very, very feared character until he'd met Joyce. But Adelaide got hit with everything, whether it's a jab, the uppercuts, the footwork of Sokolovsky, I think, bamboozled him more than anything. So he needs to go back to the drawing board there. He should be, it sounds really mean, but he should be taking that result as a loss and dealing with it as a loss, mentally, tactically, in every single way. So, yeah, absolutely agree. The Sokolovsky rematch could be a disaster. Unless he wants to do like Conor Benn did when he almost got knocked out when he was fighting a guy from Benelux. That's it, Cedric Pernot. Because he did come back and do a pitch-perfect performance over, 10 or 12 rounds afterwards. But I think at the moment, so early on in his career, Adelaide needs to regroup, maybe take a little step back and fight someone at a different level. Maybe like a WBA global champion or something, So
those wretched belts rearing their ugly head again. But no, I agree with you there. And just to touch upon that, really, that was going to be my next question. After the fight, I think David Adelaide was, was adamant that he won the fight. He felt like he was clearly ahead. That again, I think that's arguably more worrying than the performance. I think you have to, take your time, look back, review the tape. I think, it's a pointer for prospects in the future. If you're not sure, just say you need to go back and watch it and have a look with your coach. But he seemed pretty adamant. I think I saw a social media post today where he said he'd watched it back without the commentary and he felt like he'd won the fight. That's worrying because I don't see somebody looking constructively at their performance and actually objectively seeing what happened, what went wrong, what I could do better next time. If you're kind of papering over the cracks with a very, very contentious decision, I think that is quite worrying.
Very, very few fighters will ever want to admit that they lost a fight because they realise that they're going to lose some financial traction. They're going to lose a bit of marketability. Their sponsors might be looking at them with a bit of a side eye. I think one of the few people I can think of it in history who actually turned around once the result had come out, knowing that it was wrong, was when Richie Woodall fought against Glenn Catley. And at the end of the fight, as the result was being read out, he was shaking his head and went no. And he's gone over to Glenn, apologised to him. And when the interviewer came over afterwards, he said, I didn't win that fight. And he said, forget about what the judges said. He said, I lost that fight. So he openly admitted it to himself. And everyone listening obviously took on what he'd said on board. But if you can't admit to yourself and say, listen, that was not the best of fights for me. I can understand there was a case for me losing that. I'm grateful that I got the win, but I've certainly got a lot to work on. That would be perhaps the more humble way of keeping your financial traction, your sponsors, etc. And also show that you're willing to improve. But just sort of saying I thought I won the fight on a performance that doesn't do you any favours.
Yeah, I think... maybe it's something that he will go back and revisit. I mean, he said he has and he still feels that he won the fight. But again, like you make a good point there about fighters not necessarily wanting to admit it to themselves. They want to try and keep this mystique and keep, particularly heavyweights, they're big, bad guys and they want to keep that aura of invincibility if nothing else to themselves rather than people watching. But yeah, I think there's some work to do with David Adelaide in the future. And he is only 6-0. He's very limited experience. So, maybe this will be something that we look back on in years to come and think, okay, well, that was a turning point. You would hope that is the case, considering how the fight went, but we'll see. We'll wait and see. From one Frank Warren show this past weekend to the one coming up this weekend. Headline, of course, by Sonny Edwards against somebody I know that you rate very, very highly, Mthalane-Edwards. Arguably one of the most underrated fighters in the sport. A very, very tough fight for Sonny Edwards. We've mentioned there, admittedly at a different level with David Adelaide, but jumping from this level to that level, I think Sonny Edwards is in for a hard night on Friday night. Yeah,
it's a really hard night. If you look at Mthalane-Edwards' his resume, last fight he lost, I think, was 2008. I think that was Nonito Donaire. Yeah. If you're going to lose against someone, that's a great person to lose against. And then just to sort of throw this into the mix of people who don't know this guy, he's a multiple weight world champion, but he's held titles for years. Actually, maybe not multiple weight, but he's certainly been a world champion for many years. But 2 years after he lost against Nonito Donaire, he stops Tete, one of the most destructive punchers out there. And that's just one of the people that he's beat against. His knockout ratio is very high. Sonny Edwards has not been in with anyone like this. He's, I believe, 13 years this guy's junior. He's 38, Mthalane, but he's a very young 38, and he still bangs very, very hard. Sonny doesn't have destructive power. I think he's got 4 stoppages in his 15 fights. He's a very good tactician. When he's at his best is when he uses his head. Where he gets tagged is where he decides to have a little tear up, and it doesn't bear well for him because he doesn't have that knockout power. So if he's going to win this fight, he needs to be dancing around there a la Billy Joe Saunders and without any horseplay. But this is a very, very tough fight for him. If he wins this, he's going to get all the plaudits that he deserves. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a tough fight, as world title fight should be. You know, he's gone after, by his own admission, he's targeted Mthalane. You know, he's watched Mthalane over a number of years. I know that they shared, I think, Artem Dalakane's training camp together a few years ago. Just to touch on Mthalane's record, he also beat certain John Real Casimiro, who's obviously doing all sorts of bits and pieces now at bantamweight, potentially going to fight Naoya Inoue. So this is a real test. This is not a weak champion. This is not somebody, this is not a cherry pick. This is not somebody that's been plucked from the top 15 for a vacant belt. If Sonny Edwards is indeed going to beat Mthalane, then he deserves tremendous amount of credit. He's the number 1 with Ring Magazine. He's a long reigning champion. He's avoided largely over the years. He's struggled to get fights. But with that being said, it could be the perfect time for Sonny Edwards. He's fresh, he's young, he's confident, as we all know. We've all seen his interviews, we've all heard him talk. And he could be getting Mthalane at the right time. But regardless of that fact, it's a very tough night's work for him. Yeah, absolutely. Listen, 15-0. It's not a very long resume, to say the least. But the man exudes confidence. And I've probably been ringside for maybe about 5, possibly 6 of Sonny's fights. And he zones out when he's in there. He really does. He's got a lot of very, very loyal fans. And but the way he's able to zone out there and stick to his plans are very good. Like I said, he does have those moments where he gets a bit cocky and decides to sort of trade. But I would guess that he's going in there with a stalwart game plan of working his way around the jab, doing that unorthodox stuff that he loves to do, throwing the shots from funny angles, a touch of that Nassim Hamed about him when he does that. He's also got a terrific engine. So this is obviously going to be a points victory he'll be aiming for. Obviously, if he does see he's hurt him, then he's going to try and sort of finish him off. But if Edwards has got a chance of doing this, it's got to be peppering with punches in short bursts and moving around. If he stands too long on one spot, he could be a target. And we're not just talking about being tagged, we're talking about being stopped. Yeah, he does have that nice relaxed style. It's kind of why he has that engine, really. You see, Roman Gonzalez, I know you're a huge fan, not comparing Sonny Edwards to Roman Gonzalez, but that nice relaxed style. They seem like they can box for 15 rounds when it's nice and easy. I feel like there's been times in the past where Sonny, I know he was dropped by Marcel Braithwaite, he was also dropped by... I can't remember the guy's name now. It's where he'd done the ankle ligaments when he went over. And I feel like those were lapses in concentration, as you mentioned, kind of just staying in the pocket a little bit too long. But he'll be very aware of the fact that he can't necessarily do that against somebody like Mthalane. But that's enough of us talking about Sonny Edwards. I was fortunate enough to catch up with him a few weeks ago when I went to Sheffield. Here's what he had to say about his challenge of the IBF flyweight champion Mthalane. I know that you've been kind of hovering around looking for a big fight at Superfly or Fly.
don't really get much bigger than that, particularly at flyweight.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying that he's the Ring Magazine #1, so that just shows the level of the fight I'm getting in with. I mean, a lot of people sort of regard the Ring as the most, accurate rankings. A lot of people don't, just how you look at it. But to be considered #1 at the weight just shows, the quality of fight I'm getting in with. I think he's ranked #3 with BoxRec. This is his second world title reign with the IBF. This will be his, I think he's made 4 defenses. I think this will be his 5th. So he's a great fighter, someone I've seen up close, I know quite well. And for me, I'm hoping I'm getting him at the right time. But taking that away, he still is a very dangerous threat. I mean, you can see this current title reign in the twilight stages of his career, as you'd think. He's still got plenty left in the tank. I mean, he beat Mohammed Wasim recently to win the world title, and he's tranced every one of his mandatories and his voluntaries in between. So hopefully I give him a bit more to think about than his last however many opponents.
So that was Sonny Edwards ahead of his bout this Friday with Moruti Mthalane. Very, very confident young man, as we mentioned beforehand. Do you think he'll pull it off?
You've got to back the man from the British Isles, haven't you? It's a tall order, but has he got the skills to do it? Yes. Would I put my money on it? I'm going to say no. I want Edwards to win. I really do. I just think this is a really tall order, and I'm just not sure if he's got enough on his professional CV to pull it off at this point. But if he does, this is one I really want to be proven wrong with.
I have a sneaky feeling that he's going to pull it off. I have to say. I mean, Moruti Mthalane, as we've mentioned, he's a very, very capable world-class operator, genuine world-class operator, legitimate world champion. But I just feel like it may be the right time for Sonny Edwards. I feel like this is coming at a time where all of the odds are in his favour. You're very rarely going to get a champion of that standing to come over to the UK headline event on BT Sport. I think it may be close. If it's close, I feel like he may get the nod on the decision. Interesting, in the interview that we did in Sheffield, he said that he doesn't want to win on a robbery decision. He wants to feel like he's earned the shot and he's earned the title. He doesn't want to get a kind of a spurious split decision win, which all credit to him. I'm sure in the deep, dark depths of night, if he gets that, I'm sure he won't be too bothered. I'm sure as long as he can take home the world title. But yeah, there's something about it that I do fancy Sonny Edwards just to pull it off. I think it's going to be very tough. I think he's going to have to go through the fire at certain points, but I wonder if he's just getting Moruti at the right time. But it's one of those where I don't really have much of a confident pick. I know we've seen Dennis McCann and others putting down big bets and big wagers. I won't be following that. I think I might have a little flutter on Edwards by decision at Betfred, of course. But moving away and talking about the rest of the undercard, Michael Conlan, the Conlan Revolution. We're kind of getting to the point now with Michael Conlan where he's going to be fighting for world title sooner rather than later. But beforehand, he's got Ionut Baluta. I never know how to pronounce the first name. It always reminds me of Jojo Dan. I want to call him Jojo Baluta, but anyway. But we saw Baluta last time out against David Oliver Joyce look very, very good in that fight. We've seen him against TJ Dehenny as well, also ex-world champion, very capable fighter. Michael Conlan will have to be on his P's and Q's in this fight. This is not a walkover by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all, no. What I like with Conlan is that I call him Bob Arum's little pet, since he's turned professional, since he's been able to put his middle finger away from the amateurs and sort of carve his trail as a professional boxer, he's been under the big lights, a lot of Madison Square action, and Arum has got him into those fights with good matchmaking against fighters that again will get that marketing and financial traction. But the big difference here, as opposed to many other fighters, that Conlan can actually produce the goods. And he's done it obviously up to this point. This fight could be that essential stepping stone to get him maybe within a couple of fights away from looking at a world title. I sincerely hope that 2022 is going to be that year where we see Michael Conlan crowned, and I think he could be in some barn-burning defences if that happens. I mean, I'm leapfrogging here his next fight, but I'm a big fan of him, and I'm a big fan of the whole revolution.
Yeah, particularly super bantamweight is a great division at the minute. We've seen MJ Akhmadaliev, Steph Fulton, which is kind of the route that it looks as though Michael Conlan is going down. I know Adam Booth was talking about that they would take that fight tomorrow. Adam is infamous for his matchmaking and the fact that he's more than happy to back his fighters in those fights when he thinks they're ready. He believes he's ready for the Steph Fulton fight. Michael Conlon believes he is ready. Bob Arum, as you mentioned there, knows a thing or two about matching fighters to world titles. But yeah, Baluta is a capable fighter, but I do feel stylistically, I think Conlon will just control the distance on him, and I feel like a no-frills performance is kind of what the doctor ordered in this fight. I don't necessarily feel that Conlon needs to come through and look spectacular. Baluta is exactly the type of guy who can come in and upset the apple cart, and I feel like it's just important for Conlon to get some good, hard rounds under his belt before making that transition to world level come the end of the year.
Knowing Adam Booth, and you say that, I think he sort of needs to sort of pick his punches. If Conlon had a trainer in his corner who said just throw 100 punches per minute, Conlon would love it because he's an explosive fighter. But Adam Booth, if you remember when George Groves fought against James DeGale, he kept saying to him every time Groves was coming back to the corner, don't get greedy with punches. 1, 1, 2. Throw maybe the hook off the end, but no more than that. And it'll be those similar sort of orders. Keep it simple, keep it effective, and you'll win the fight. He doesn't need to go for a knockout. I think here he'd actually probably get more credit by putting on a boxing performance, and that'll get the attention of people worldwide. It's a fight we're looking forward to. Yeah,
it's a very good fight. I'm looking forward to that, as I am Troy Williamson versus Kieran Smith. The winner of that will become mandatory for the red-hot British super welterweight title. I mean, the super welterweight division in this country, in the UK, is absolutely thriving at the minute. It seems like every other week we're getting these great fights at 154 pounds. Really nice clash of styles there, Troy Williamson versus Kieran Smith. Troy Williamson's big, strong, comes forward. Kieran Smith, awkward, slick, southpaw, struggled himself to get fights in the past. That's a really good style matchup, one I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, great matchmaking. I think sort of coming back to one of our earlier points, Britain's at the moment has got some of the best domestic dust-ups that we've seen in a long time, and this is one of them. We'd mentioned before about the middleweights as a fantastic division where some great matchups have happened, are happening, and are scheduled. And I think 154 is on that parallel as well. This is a great fight. If it's just thinking about Parker, Chisora, I think this is probably more pay-per-view worthy than that fight is, to be honest. It's if it goes to 12 rounds, it could be an absolute tear-up. I don't think these guys are going to go in there and look to have a chess match, that's for sure. So, we're bated breath looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's a really good style matchup. I think somebody like Kieran Smith is, we mentioned about kind of intercontinental and continental and whatever titles in the past. He's been struggling for a fight for a long time. I know he won, I think he's got like a WBC Silver International whatever title. Sorry, Mauricio. But he's struggled to really capitalise on that. But this is a great opportunity for him. I think style-wise, it's going to be quite intriguing. I think Troy Williamson's going to try and unsettle him, put the pressure on. But I'm really looking forward to it. I think I do edge towards Kieran Smith. I think Kieran Smith is awkward. I think he's a difficult fighter to pin down, and he's really waited for this opportunity. As has Troy Williamson. The winner of the fight becomes mandatory for the British title, and there's some brilliant fights there. You've got Fowler, Fitzgerald, Conway. You've got Fowler, Fitzgerald, Conway, Cheeseman, of course, he was in here a couple of weeks ago, and there's all sorts of like Nav Mansouri, Jez Smith, Sam Eggington. We've got like 154 pounds. There's probably 10 fighters who you could throw in with each other and make for a brilliant fight. So there's a real carrot at the end of the stick for the winner of that fight to go and get a big fight against a Ted Cheeseman, against a Scott Fitzgerald. So one I'm really looking forward to as well. Moving on, you have just mentioned there Chisora versus Parker coming this Saturday on Sky Sports pay-per-view, which we will discuss in a minute. But before then, I was lucky enough to go and catch up with Joseph Parker, former WBO heavyweight champion of the world, at his training camp in Morecambe a couple of weeks ago. Here's what he had to say about his bout with Derek Chisora.
After the split with Kieran and when he left, there was a fight sort of looming, May 1 with Chisora, and I had no camp, had no trainer, had no setup. So I thought to myself, it would be good to get Tyson's views on, who I should train with or who he recommends as a good trainer. So I gave him a call, and he said to me that, the top 3 trainers, Andy was one of them. And so as soon as he said that, I was, we set up a Zoom call. I think we had about 3 or 4 calls, and then like 6 days later, I was flying to Ireland for the first time obviously to meet Andy and then to gel, and then get to work because there was a fight sort of locked in already.
So that was Joseph Parker, or as I like to call him, Lupasuliai La'auli Ole Maliatoa. I learned that it took me about 10 minutes to learn it all, but I had to do all sorts of crazy stuff to remember it. But anyway, that's his Samoan chief name. But Joseph Parker looks in fine fettle, looks very happy, looks nice and settled under the stewardship of Andy Lee, and expecting a big performance against Derek Chisora this weekend.
It's a good fight. Chisora... He's been boxing now for, about 17 years or something. And when he loses, then he bounces back with like 3 emphatic wins. You keep writing the guy off and then he comes back again. He's when he fought against Dillian Whyte, when he got stopped in 11th, he was winning the fight. Yeah,
even with the point deductions.
Yeah, even with the point, let's forget about this. But then he fights against Carlos Takam. He's having the absolute crap beaten out of him in the first round. His corner is shouting, the referee's going to stop it. He looks over and then starts belting Takam. You don't know what to expect with him. And one thing's for sure, he's going to go in there. He's going to try and beat the living hell out of Joseph Parker. It's a really, really good fight. I'm a big fan of Parker. He's got great skills. He can really punch as well. Let's not forget that. Both fighters under new trainers adds a little bit more spice to it. How I see this fight going, I'd say 12 round distance is probably what we're looking at here. I would have to verge towards Joseph Parker just based on his pedigree and probably his youth as well. But you never know with Del Boy. You never know what he's going to bring to the table. So, it's a good fight. Looking forward to it. Yeah,
it's a good clash of styles. I think it's always been a good clash of styles. You've got the kind of marauding, aggressive style of Derek Chisora, and as you mentioned, kind of the more slick skill set of Joseph Parker, kind of straight punching, fast hands. But it's something that I mentioned to Andy Lee, which we'll hear coming soon. Obviously, Andy Lee, his new trainer, is that we've kind of seen him drift away from that a little bit in recent years. Myself and a lot of other people, and Joseph himself, weren't very impressed with his performance against Junior Farr last time out. Very messy, ugly fight. He's had a few of those in recent years. So the change in trainer, while it did come as something of a surprise, I can understand it. I can see why now. But going to Andy Lee, and again in the interview where I spoke with Andy and speaking with Joseph, that kind of reverting back to what we're used to seeing from Joseph Parker for this fight, I think is key. The fast hands, the movement, the skills. You can't stand there with somebody like Derek Chisora. We've seen Joseph Parker in the past against Dillian Whyte get roughed up, bullied onto the ropes. That's something that his ex-trainer Kevin Barry was, since that fight, since the Dillian Whyte fight, consistently mentioned. We've not got that dog in Derek. Derek definitely has the dog. We don't have that dog in Joseph Parker. He needs to develop that. And he's really going to have to, as much as we talk about the skill set and the this and the that, he's going to have to bite down on the gum shield because Chisora will get close and he will make it an uncomfortable night in there for him on Saturday.
Yeah, it's one thing we know about Derek is that he can bite down on his gum shield and he can just keep motoring forward. The very first fight, with Dillian Whyte, which I actually edged it one round to Chisora. The engine on the man is just sensational. So it's going to be interesting to see how Parker deals with that swarming style. I'm not sure if he's been in with a heavyweight actually who can operate with that sort of intensity and can keep it up for a full 12 rounds. Both fighters are vulnerable to the left hook because both got floored by Dillian Whyte. So it'll be interesting to see how their defence works out here because they're both heavy-handed fighters. Both new trainers. There's a lot of variables to throw into this fight. And they're both under a pay-per-view spotlight, so they know they can't be putting on a crap performance. It can't be a sluggish one. I think it's going to come down to whether or not Joseph Parker comes in peak physical condition. I wonder if all those music videos he's been doing over lockdown, which for the records I'm a big fan. I think he's got a career on Broadway afterwards. And I'm also interested to see if he might do maybe a little duet with Andy Lee. Maybe they can, sort of do something. That could be interesting as well. But in the meantime, if he's able to come in, peak condition, get rid of those few pounds of flab, which he looked like he was carrying his last fight, and he comes in with a more destructive game plan, it's not that he's going to cruise against Chisora, but I think it could be the sort of win that could maybe propel him back into limelight action for another world title shot.
Yeah. it's the kind of fight on paper, particularly over, historically, that you would look at with Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora's style. The fact that Derek's coming into the fight with 10 losses. We saw last time out against Usyk, him struggle with the movement and kind of the technical ability of Usyk, where you would look at it and go, yeah, Joseph Parker wins that by decision. But I feel that the Joseph Parker that boxed Junior Farr, if that Joseph Parker turns up against the Derek Chisora who lost to Alexander Usyk, then I'd probably lean towards Chisora. You mentioned not having the closest experience he would have had against a heavyweight of Chisora's style would have been that Dillian Whyte fight where we saw him roughed up. I said to Joseph in an interview, you were manhandled in certain parts of that fight, and that's something that's always kind of lingered there. Everybody says it about Joseph Parker. Is he too nice? He seems like such a nice guy. Does he have that dog in him? And Chisora will test him with that. The only thing is with Derek, you've mentioned there about the Takam fights, you mentioned about the Dillian Whyte fights. He's been in some great fights over the years, but he's been in some not so great fights as well with Ajit Kabayel. We were ringside for Senad Gashi. That was a very, very forgetful night at the office for Derek. If he turns up and he's not necessarily at it, then you could see Joseph Parker potentially cruise into a points win. But you never know what to expect from Derek, which is what makes him something of a... it makes him more intimidating, if nothing else. You never know what he's going to do at any given moment, whether he's in the ring or outside of the ring. But if he turns up and he's really at it, then I really do feel that Joseph Parker needs to show something that we haven't seen from him since, in my opinion, the early rounds of the Dillian Whyte fight. I know in the last round of the Dillian Whyte fight he came close to stopping him, but I haven't seen that fast feet, fast hands, straight punching since the first couple of rounds of that Dillian Whyte fight until the head clash knockdown, which he claims, concussed him for the remainder of the fight. Obviously, you have to take him at his word, but it's really been since those first couple of rounds that I haven't seen Joseph Parker do what I feel that he's going to need to do to get the win against Derek Chisora on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I agree. If he comes out in a similar fashion or similar condition to his last fight, you've got to give the odds to Chisora. But again, I've been in press conferences where Chisora is not even fighting on the card, but he's attended because he's trying to make some noise to maybe get the attention of one of the heavyweights. And you get edgy. You're thinking, what's he going to do here? Is it going to be another flying table or something? Or he starts calling out Dillian Whyte in the middle of the room. It can get heated very quick. He can make a room go dark very, very quickly, as he can in the ring, depending on what version of him turns up. What I would say is this: is that he's got Buddy McGirt in his corner, and Buddy has had to be in with some very testing characters. Kovalev being one of them. Going back years, Johnny Tapia. I mean, you don't get more crazy than that in terms of a fight to try and discipline. So
remember, there's a Ghost of Johnny Tapia written by Paul Zanon.
I've forgotten about that, but did I write that? Yeah, I wrote that one. Yeah, so
just the shameless plug there. That's fine.
Very shameless. But yeah, I think Buddy McGirt's got a no bullshit attitude about him, and obviously Don Charles had a great rapport with Del Boy, but I think Del Boy probably got away with a lot of his own behaviour that he wanted it to do, and that's it. I can't imagine Buddy McGirt would stand for that. If he wasn't happy with the way that Del Boy was acting, he'd part ways with him. So if Buddy's able to nurture what we've seen from Del Boy in his last fight against Usyk and move that forward and maybe throw a little bit more into the toolkit, and Parker turns up as he had in his last fight, then yes, it's Chisora. But if Andy Lee's brought the magic to the table, we got a really interesting fight on our hands here.
Before we talk about the trainers, as you just mentioned there, very intimidating man, Derek Chisora, none more so than when I interviewed him the last week when I went down to the Haymaker gym. Here's what he had to say about his fight this weekend with Joseph Parker. How important is it that you set that pace and you keep him uncomfortable on May the 1st?
You know what he says, from what I'm hearing, he don't want to be bullied anymore in the ring and stuff. He's gonna bring heat, he's gonna bring this and this. But we don't really care, to be honest. We're gonna go there and do what we need to do for ourselves.
What are you expecting from him? He's saying all of that stuff. Are you expecting him to get on his bike, straight shots, keep moving?
Bro, you can't change your fighter. It don't matter if you got a new trainer. You can't change your fighter. A runner is always going to be a runner. That is it. A runner ain't going to tell you, okay, I'm going to stand and fight now. It's a lie. He's going to be running.
So that was our time spent in the gym with Derek Chisora. Interesting, man. I think the start of the interview it's always quite telling. When you start an interview on a certain note, it's always difficult to kind of get it back. But yes, I think he was in more of his fight mode, intimidation mode, or whatever you want to call it, but he's a man about business, and he seems ready for war this weekend against Joseph Parker. You mentioned just before we cut into that about Buddy McGirt in the corner. Of course, I caught up with Buddy McGirt, which we'll hear from Buddy shortly. But yeah, I actually felt it was quite an interesting blend. You've got Buddy McGirt, who's a very cool customer. You've seen the work that he's done in the past, and he's historically kind of stripped fighters back and he got Kovalev back to his boxing, just get behind the jab. I mean, Arturo Gatti was another one who he got settled down boxing. Don't really think we're going to see that with Derek Chisora. I think we're kind of at the stage now where Derek kind of is what he is, and I think it's more a case of obviously not training himself, but the preparation that he knows he needs to do to get into the physical shape. But I think more with Derek, it's that mental side. And if Buddy can keep him stimulated and keep him on task against Joseph Parker on Saturday night.
Yeah, when Derek performs at his best, it's usually when he bites down his gum shield and he just keeps clubbing and swinging. And he's got that sort of Joe Fraser-esque sort of style that's really hard to land the punch cleanly because he's got his elbows up or he's crouched down, and someone fighting out of a crouch, it's always tough to nail them hard. I totally agree. If Buddy McGirt's able to bring a bit of calm, that could be the ticket of literally him winning in there. I think the other thing as well in terms of Buddy McGirt, let's not forget in terms of what he brings to the table, which I think Derek hasn't had before. You're looking at an 80-fight pro veteran here. 3-weight world champion?
2 weights.
2-weight, fought against the likes of Pernell Whitaker, albeit he lost. But he's been in a good company. So he was world champion for a number of years. And so he's got a lot to bring within the ropes, not just sort of standing from the outside. And there's a lot of trainers out there who have never really fought at professional level, haven't fought as professionals, and certainly haven't achieved the accolades that he had. So it's one of the few times where actually we've got 2 trainers, both former world champions, in opposing corners in there. So it could be interesting to see what happens if we turn up in a Rocky IV style bust up at the beginning where McGirt and Lee are in there and it all kicks off, So, but I think McGirt will bring that calm about him. But ultimately, when the bell rings in there, Chisora will do what Chisora does, which is go at him like a bull and keep applying the pressure, keep him low, keep at the crouch, and look to smash him with hooks.
So let's hear about Buddy McGirt, or let's hear from Buddy McGirt. I caught up with him on my way to see Derek Chisora. Here's what he had to say about going up against Andy Lee and indeed Joseph Parker with Derek Chisora this weekend. How does it differ working with a big, lumbering, aggressive heavyweight like a Derek Chisora compared to some of the other fighters that you've worked with in the past? Does it change the role of a trainer dealing with a big, burly heavyweight?
No, it doesn't change the role. With a guy like him, he's been around a long time. He's got his style. There's no changing it. So I look at him, evaluate him, and see what I got to work with. I mean, I got to see how can I make this better, what he's doing, because to try to change him, it's not going to happen. Because he's been doing it too long and he's setting his ways. So the key is to try to enhance, not try to, but enhance what he has. And try to smooth out some of the rough edges. But, we know Derek, when the bell rings, we know what he's going to do. You don't have to look for him. So the key is to enhance that.
So that was former 2-weight world champion turned Hall of Fame trainer Buddy McGirt. Very cool character, Buddy McGirt. Always a pleasure to catch up with him. And yeah, spoke very well. He spoke about all of the things that we've mentioned there. I think he's very aware of the fact that Derek is now a grizzly veteran. I don't think he's going to be teaching an old dog new trick, so to speak. But I think it's more about keeping Derek focused on the game plan. He's made no bones about it. We need to go in there and we need to mug Joseph Parker. We need to go in, apply the pressure from the first round and see if he can stand up to the heat. So he's saying all of the right things. He's saying all of the things that we expected, and just like Andy Lee will say coming up shortly, he's very much looking forward to pitting his wits against Andy Lee, somebody who trained under a certain Emmanuel Stewart who knows a thing or two about heavyweight boxing as well. So yeah, it's an interesting little subplot here with Buddy McGirt versus Andy Lee. It's always good when you have that kind of, admittedly they're not 2 trainers who grab the microphone and shout. It's not Joe Gallagher versus Steffi Ball that we had a few months back, but yeah, an interesting subplot to the fight.
Without a doubt. And Andy Lee is he's one of those guys that when he finished as a professional boxer, I wouldn't have pitted him as to become a professional trainer. He's very softly spoken. And if I had money to put on it, I'd have said he's just going to disappear off into the sunset and start a business, do something, and that's it. But I'm absolutely delighted that he's decided to become a boxing trainer, and I think he could end up by being a prolific one. He's got a nice, gentle manner about him, but that in the same way, like when he was in the ring, when he needs to, he will unleash hell, and he's got a lot of spice to bring there. And he could end up by being a Freddie Roach type character where he can speak softly if need be, but he's also that same person that can kind of like with Angelo Dundee when Sugar Ray Leonard was losing in his fight. You're fucking blowing this, you know. And I can see Andy Lee being one of those type of characters as well. So I'm not sure if we're allowed to swear on Boxing Social.
You're fine.
So
okay.
We can bleep that one out another time. So, I think Andy Lee. Joseph Parker's a matchup which, if someone had said to me about 5 years ago as trainer and boxer, I'd have gone, that's not really going to work. But it seems to be. It really seems to be. And Joseph Parker seems to have got a second lease of life here.
Yeah, and you mentioned that about Andy Lee as well. We mentioned Emmanuel Stewart, of course, trained with him, and Andy, he said to me numerous times in interviews that Manny was the biggest influence on his life outside of his parents, and he wasn't shy of sticking the boot in the corner when needed. We've seen him do it with Vladimir Klitschko in the past, Lennox Lewis in the past. I'm quite sure Andy does have that in the locker if needs be. Also doing a great job with Tyson Fury, who, of course, this is how this came about. In the interview with Andy Lee, he told me that, very humble, very modest as he always is, but he said that he got the job because he knew Tyson Fury, or that's the only reason why he got the job. I'm sure there was probably slightly more to it than that, but yeah, interesting to see what that link-up's going to be. He's of course training Paddy Donovan, who's making his way in the welterweight division, very exciting prospect. Also working with Isaac Lowe, Jay Quigley, who's just got himself a great fight announced against Shane Mosley Jr. on the Haney Linares undercard. So I kind of put it to Andy. I think I'm probably in agreement with you in a sense of, while he was active or just after he retired, I didn't necessarily see him becoming a trainer. But now he has. If you look at the history of him living with Emmanuel Stewart, training under Emmanuel Stewart, every experience that he would have had in America, and also the stewardship under Adam Booth and becoming world champion. And he's trained under one of the greatest trainers of all time in Emmanuel Stewart, and certainly one of the great modern trainers in Adam Booth. You can see now where the pieces of the puzzle are fitting together and where he would have accrued that knowledge over the years.
I don't think Andy Lee will ever need to approach a fighter to say, do you want me to train you? I think that he will have a long list of people. And I genuinely believe that when word got around that Andy Lee was becoming a boxing trainer, I bet you his phone was going off the hook. And I also genuinely believe that he probably thought, well, I'll start with the first fighter and sort of see how it goes, but it's not really what I'm intending to do. Reminds me a little bit of Jamie Moore to an extent. I remember when he was training Tommy Coyle, he said, once I'm finished with Tommy, he said, that's it, I'm not going to do anymore. And then unfortunately, due to the fact that Oliver Harrison passed away, then he ended up by sort of inheriting that stable, and then various other fighters ended up by joining Jamie. And you look at who he's trained now. So it's a whole load of world champions, and he's become a very respected trainer of champions and fighters in general. But again, Jamie's not someone that's going around pitching. People are approaching him to train him. So Andy is still very young. He does have a very sharp boxing brain. He had a great toolkit as a boxer, and all of that is transferable in addition to everything that Manny Stewart brought to him from the Kronk gym. So would you want Andy Lee in your corner? Absolutely. So I can understand why there's a long list of people queuing up, and I wish him a very lucrative future. But for the moment, be very interested to see what he's done different to Kevin Barry when he's in the corner against Chisora.
Let's hear from Andy Lee coming up next. We've spoken about him. Let's hear from the man himself ahead of Joseph Parker's bout with Derek Chisora.
Well, Joseph, if he loses, it's hard to see him reaching that pinnacle again. I think Chisora on his day will beat anybody, barring Tyson Fury maybe, barring maybe Anthony Joshua a while, but like all the rest of the guys, he's right up there. Chisora's right up there. And that's what Joseph is. He has to beat this guy to show that he's one of the elite heavyweights. But Chisora is a great fighter, a warrior. Always comes, you know what it is. Given us great entertainment over the years, and good fighter.
So that was former WBO middleweight champion turned trainer. I mentioned him, he started off with Paddy Donovan because he said that he saw Paddy Donovan and, it was an opportunity that he couldn't turn down. He'd seen Paddy for a number of years and he said that he was such a talent that he couldn't turn him down. Then he got Jay Quigley, then Tyson Fury, then Isaac Lowe, now Joseph Parker. So it's kind of snowballed for him, as you were saying before we cut to him with Jamie Moore. Very similar kind of, it's funny how boxing works like that. But I'm interested to see, again, something that you said before we cut to him. Are we going to see the Kronk style? We saw the changes that Tyson Fury made in preparation for the Deontay Wilder rematch under Andy Lee and, of course, Sugar Hill, who was the main trainer. But Joseph Parker, Derek Chisora, are we going to see him coming forward? I would assume the plan is going to be to box on the back foot, utilise the natural skill set or the things that we've grown accustomed to associating with Joseph Parker over the years. Or he might surprise us. We might see that Kronk style and Joseph Parker come and put a foot, try and get a foothold in the fight in the middle of the ring and, let the big shots go, which I think would probably be a bit of a surprise considering what Derek Chisora is bringing to the table. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what changes Andy Lee's made in Joseph Parker in a very short space of time as well. Both trainers, I'm sure, would have liked longer to work with their fighters. They haven't had that, but they're both going in there, and I'm intrigued to see what influence they both have, particularly the influence of Andy Lee on Joseph Parker.
One of the things that I'm expecting to see that I think Andy Lee will bring to the table very nicely is rope work. So there's one thing about Derek Chisora is that at some point you're going to be on the ropes and he's going to be throwing bombs at you. And you can either step to the side, try and claim the centre of the ring, or you can try and counter the work. And Andy Lee, as we know, was the master of throwing the left hook counter and knocking people's spark out. I'm not sure if Joseph Parker will be aiming to do that, but I can imagine in sparring you would have had him on the ropes and getting people to throw bombs at him and basically alleviating the punches and working sort of defensive genius to an extent. So there's a lot of what ifs and what styles are going to be brought there. Everything from Andy Lee's personal style through to everything he learnt at the Kronk and everyone he crossed paths with at the Kronk. But we also have to remember as well that you've still got a lot of Kevin Barry floating around there, and that's not suddenly just been completely pulled out. It's, he didn't become world champion by not training with Kevin Barry. We have to remember that. So first fight, Andy Lee. Let's see the fine tuning that's gone on there, and let's see what version of him turns up. Be interesting to see what shape he's in as well. That will say a lot about how serious he's taken the training camp.
He looked in great shape when we were in the gym. I think we'll probably lay a bit of workout footage over here. But yeah, he looked in great shape. He looked fast on his feet, looked light on his feet. I think he said, I was quite surprised, as I mentioned, as anybody would have been, with how close he and Kevin Barry were, the nature of the split, and it kind of came out of nowhere. But again, in hindsight, when you look at Joseph Parker's performances over a period of time, I'm not sure that his career was necessarily going in the upward trajectory. So making that change now, I think, is a positive thing if that's indeed what he felt was working. But yeah, it was a strange one, not necessarily a strange one, but a surprising one. Him and Kevin Barry, very, very close. Kevin, obviously an experienced fighter, an experienced trainer of heavyweights in the past with David Tua, etc. And guided Joseph Parker to the world title. So I think the fact that Joseph has been willing to take himself to, he said to me in the interview that it was very kind of like when he first turned over. He doesn't know anybody in Morecambe. He's not got any friends there. When he's in Vegas, I think fair to say that there's a lot of things to do in Vegas outside of the boxing gym, which I know that Joe is partial to. So there hasn't been that for him in Morecambe. I'm not sure that he would have necessarily made that transition, made that jump, unless it was necessary, unless he had to do it or he felt that he had to do it to win the fight. I think it's a good sign for Parker backers or for Joseph Parker himself, the fact that he's been willing to do that and take this fight seriously. He does look in great shape. He's made no secret of the fact that he feels buoyed by the fact that he's with Tyson Fury, and obviously not there at the minute in Las Vegas, but they've done a huge proportion of the camp together. They're very close. And you can see the energy in his face. He looks very happy. He looks excited to essentially start a new phase of his career under Andy Lee and Morecambe.
Sometimes we all need to hit the refresh button, and this is happening right now for Joseph Parker. Whether it works or not, we don't know. We'll see how the fight goes. But even if he was to lose it, he may continue with Andy Lee for the rest of his career, just due to the fact that he's in a new, refreshing environment. I I hope that the split between him and Kevin Barry was not acrimonious, because I know the history of how those two hooked up, and it's a nice story. And Parker was living in Barry's house for a while, and he literally treated him like a son. And I've interviewed enough trainers to hear really horrible stories of how the fighter has dumped them after everything they've done. Abel Sanchez was one of them, and I remember him telling me, he said, the trainer is the only person out of the whole group who we don't sign contracts, and the fighter can just drop us in a heartbeat. And he told me the story about how Triple G had gone over and met him, and everything he'd done for him up in Big Bear. And then all of a sudden, I think it was 2 days after I'd done the interview, I was almost like maybe I was the finger of death, so to say. But 2 days after we'd done the interview, that's when Triple G, I think his team popped Sanchez an email to say, by the way, yeah, we're done here. So so I hope it wasn't an acrimonious slip between Parker and Barry. But either way, let's see what happens with Parker and Andy Lee now.
Yeah, it seemed from the surface, at least. I mean, I haven't spoken to Kevin Barry in any great length about it. I spoke to him very briefly afterwards. You mentioned Joseph Parker staying in Kevin Barry's house in Las Vegas. That was kind of one of my regular vaunts when I was traveling. When we were allowed to travel, I used to like going to Kevin Barry's gym or Barry's gym, and then going to see Joseph, or going back to the house where he would live with Guido Vianello and the rest of the guys that they were training. So it was a bit of a surprise, but yeah, as you mentioned, I think the refresh button is probably a good way to put it. It seems as though that's what's happened here. I feel like, well, Parker, by his own admission, felt like he needed a change. He wasn't excited to go back to Las Vegas anymore, so he decided to up sticks and move to Morecambe, which is a little bit of a strange one, going from Las Vegas to Morecambe. Final one on Chisora-Parker. Pay-per-view fight for you?
No. I think it's one of those ones that it's not that it'd be a better fight if you don't have to pay for it. I just don't think it's worthy of pay-per-view. I really don't. End of story. It just doesn't pull me into sort of want to. I was going to say cancel a night out with my mates. That was back in the days pre-corona. We're sounding like Uncle Albert during the war. But yeah, I just genuinely don't believe it holds enough sensational energy to it. I could be wrong, but I don't think it will.
I think it's a really good fight, but I agree with you. I don't think it's a pay-per-view headliner. I spoke to Eddie after the fight was announced when I was in the Coley Gravatsky bubble. He said to me that it was a pay-per-view event. We will come on to the rest of the undercard shortly, but I feel like the card itself is a good card. It's a strong card, but if it had, I mean, obviously a Wilder Fury or something like that on top would definitely make it pay-per-view, but kind of I feel like it's missing what Chisora-Parker doesn't have is, you've got two guys who are probably lower echelons of the top 10 at the minute, certainly, based on the recent performances. Derek Chisora's coming off the back of a pretty resounding loss to Alexander Usyk. I felt like he was very, very competitive for 3 or 4 rounds, and then after that, I felt like Usyk kind of cruised to a points win. I felt there were moments in that fight where it looked as though Usyk could maybe force the stoppage, but I felt that Usyk, despite what Mr. Chisora still thinks about the fight, I felt like Usyk was a very handy winner in that, and I don't feel like we've had a pay-per-view worthy performance from Joseph Parker in a long time. His fight with Dillian Whyte was a fantastic fight, was a brilliant fight, but I can't even remember when that was now. You're going back, I think that was 2018, July 2018, so you're going back a fair way since his kind of last exciting fight, really. The Junior Farr fight was a lot of 1-2, falling over the front foot, holding, and it became a very messy affair. So I think it's a good fight because I think the styles will blend quite well. But as far as kind of a pay-per-view extravaganza, oh my God, I absolutely have to see Chisora-Parker. I'm not sure it quite fits that bill. As far as a pay-per-view bill go, obviously we've got Katy Taylor versus Natasha Jonas in the chief support for the undisputed lightweight title. That is a fight, again, that I am very much looking forward to, albeit I am leaning towards Katy Taylor.
Yeah, it's absolutely crap. Just finishing off with Dillian Whyte in there. The fight that Parker had against Dillian Whyte, let's not forget that Parker almost dispatched of Whyte in those last 30 seconds. He was holding on for absolute dear life. And that was the very first time he'd ever hit the canvas. And if you think of it from this perspective, if they'd have fought about 18 months earlier, Dillian Whyte would have been WBO champion of the world. And they would have been in those fights with the Joshuas and possibly even fighting Fury and whatever else. So moving on to Taylor and Jonas. Cracking fight. listen, Jonas in her last out, and she could have been champion. It was, she came out there and she put it on her. Katy Taylor, we know exactly what we're getting with Katy Taylor, which is that she is going to bring the heat. She's I don't think there's been a fight with Katy Taylor where she's ever stayed in one spot for more than 10 seconds. If she's not throwing a punch, she's taken one. So, and Jonas has a similar style. So I think this could be a real sort of hand-to-hand bash-up to an extent. I'm not sure if it will go the distance or not. But if I was going to say who's going to create a stoppage, it would probably be Taylor. Is this a last chance saloon for Jonas? Possibly on age, I don't know. But they said that about her 2 fights ago as well. So, but I think it's a cracking undercard. And you know what as well? Both absolutely lovely ambassadors of the sport. Great amateur heritage behind them as well. Have worked their way through the ranks. There's no disrespect to say Shannon Courtenay and Ebony Bridges, because that was actually a cracking
really good fight.
It really was, with very little pedigree from the both of them. But these two do possess incredible pedigree, and I think great fight.
Yeah, I think it'll be something of a chess match. I do feel that Tasha Jonas looked very good against Terry Harper. I felt that she won the fight by a couple of rounds. Very close fight. I don't think it was necessarily a robbery. I know it's a vogue term that likes to be thrown around and bandied about whenever there's a close fight, but I did feel that she won the fight against Terry Harper. I feel she was unfortunate not to walk away with the title that night. But a different type of fight, a different type of fighter in Katy Taylor that she's facing. And also for Katy Taylor, I feel that the styles that we've seen her struggle with or have some issues with, Delphine Pursoon's marauding, come forward, all action, pressure style. I feel Katy Taylor maybe in the latter years of her career, obviously an extensive long amateur background beforehand, and she's fought at a very high level as a professional. She's turned over, she's made no bones about it. She's wanted to fight for titles and seek out the best available, kind of gone about her professional career very similar in my opinion to kind of Vasily Lomachenko. When he turned over with all of the amateur acclaim and the achievements that he had, he wanted to go and fight the best available opponents as a pro, which I really liked and really respected. But I feel that this type of style, what we saw from Tasha Jonas, that kind of against Terry Harper, she was very technical, but she was aggressive with it, and she was looking to land that big southpaw backhand. I feel like she'll be trying to do the same thing with Katy Taylor here, but I feel that may just play into Katy Taylor's strengths a little bit. The fact that she's very well-rounded technician in her own right. I feel that the style that's going to give Katy Taylor problems and has given Katy Taylor problems is the Delphine Pursoon style, the Jess McCaskill style. Obviously, they boxed very early in Jess McCaskill's career and Katy Taylor as well. But I think Jess McCaskill now, look what she's gone on to achieve against Cecilia Breakhouse. She's a handful. I feel like that type of style is what we may see catch Katy Taylor out at this point. So for that reason, I do lean towards Katy Taylor. But look, as you mentioned there, a couple of fights ago, everybody was writing off Tasha Jonas. When she had her loss, everybody thought that she was done. And she was brilliant against Terry Harper, who is, a fresh world champion. Somebody who, again, had a lot of backing and still does have a lot of hype behind her. She's unifying the division in a couple of weeks' time. But yeah, a really good fight, a really interesting fight, and another really interesting fight for women's boxing, which, as you mentioned there, with Shannon Courtenay, Ebony Bridges, all of the other fights that we've seen over the last year, it's in a really good place at the minute.
Women's boxing is taken off, I think, at a speed that no one really saw happening. I've been a big fan of women's boxing for a number of years, and I've been lucky enough to interview Katy Taylor a number of times, and Tasha Jonas. I did an in-depth interview with her at the Sky Sports Studios. Savannah Marshall, I interviewed her, I think it was for Sky, probably around 2015-16, talking about her amateur accolades, and then she wasn't professional at that point. Incredible how she's managed to sort of get into the pro ranks now and get that aggressive streak out, which she had real problems. She used to choke when she was an amateur. The size of the spectacle used to sort of clog her up, and she's doing fantastic as well. But we've also, more than anything, the ladies we've got on the horizon coming through at the moment, the likes of Caroline Dubois. If it wasn't for COVID, I believe that she would have been currently holding a gold medal around her neck, and she probably would have turned professional already. And there's a few more Caroline Dubois-esque type fighters in there, not as good as Caroline. I'm not just trying to put her in a pedestal. I really do think she is that good, undefeated. I think she's an unorthodox southpaw, and but yeah, and again, she could be thrown into the lightweight mix if she suddenly decides to to turn professional. But in the meantime, Katy Taylor, I would edge her to win this. I think her counter work could be the key, because I think Jonas will come running after her. I just think that Katy Taylor's going to have a bit too much power. Her size as well may sort of kick in here. In terms of the longevity of Katy Taylor, I'm not sure how many fights she's got left in her, because you cannot keep having the Delphine Persoon type fights. Jessica McCaskill, who mentions he obviously had 2 12-rounders and against Cecilia Breakhouse, but the second one was almost like a glorified sparring session. She did exactly what she wanted in there. Just one point to bring up there. I know that a lot of the female fighters at the moment are crying out for 3-minute rounds as opposed to 2. I think that's something that should happen. And I can tell you now, from all the ladies that I've seen training at the gyms, they're not only matching the men in terms of their work ethic, but on a lot of occasions actually exceeding them. And giving them the 3-minute rounds will give them the kudos to say they're as good as men here. And I that's something that I've always wanted to see with women's boxing for many years. That sort of stop sort of saying, a woman fighter and a male fighter, we've achieved this, we've achieved that. If they get the 3-minute rounds, they're on a similar parallel. End of story. Let them crack on. So, yeah.
It's an interesting one, because I don't think I've ever spoken to a female fighter who disagrees with that. I don't think I've ever spoken to a female fighter who said, no, yeah, we like the 2-minute rounds. Every single one of them that I've spoken to has said that they like the 3-minute rounds. I always bring this up whenever this conversation comes up. I spoke to Shannon Courtney probably, it was pre-COVID, so kind of 18 months, 2 years ago. And she told me that it was something to do with dehydration or something. I think women, or something to do with they get dehydrated quicker, which of course with dehydration and the brain, and I think that was some sort of reason behind it. If I'm wrong, blame Shannon Courtney, but that's what she explained to me. So I'm not sure whether or not there is a medical or a health reason behind it. As I mentioned, I think every single female fighter who I've brought it up with would like the 3-minute rounds. But yeah, an interesting one there. Moving on, because we've rambled on here, as we always do on the Boxing Social podcast. A world title fight on the undercard. Dimitri Bivol returns to the ring for the first time in a long time against Craig Richards, which is, again, we're kind of talking about fights or partnerships or link-ups 18 months ago. I think if you'd have told me 18 months ago that Craig Richards would be boxing for a world title before Joshua Buatsi and people like that, and in the ring with, in my opinion, one of the best pure boxers in the sport, and Dimitri Bivol, I would have, probably questioned that. But he's coming off the back of a very good win against Shakan Pitters. Give him any chance of the upset against Dimitri Bivol?
Never right off the Spider-Man, honestly. I've seen him. I remember watching him against Jake Bull, who was, I think, about 3 inches taller than Spider, and he was a big underdog, and he put it on him and he beat him. He absolutely beat the hell out of him. Shakan Pitters, he took Shakan's big shots and then again flipped the fight on its head. You never know what's going to. He's a really awkward fighter, Spider, and I've spoken to people who have sparred him as well and said, you know what he's going to do, and sometimes you just can't stop it. So he's very, very slippery indeed. Bivol, we're talking another level here. We really are. He's a great technician. He's been in with everyone. He's got a great amateur pedigree to him as well. So, I'm obviously making Bivol the favourite here by some stretch. But I'm not totally writing Spider off, because this is the fight of his life here. And he has proved against other good fighters that he can cause them all sorts of problems here. And Bivol, he's a human being. He can get hit and he can be hurt. So, come on, the Spider-Man.
I think we're going to have to see. Dimitri Bivol's been out of the ring now for some time. Craig Richards, as you mentioned, had a good win over Shakan Pitters. He's got the activity. But I feel that, Dimitri Bivol is going to have a pretty bad night, and Craig Richards is going to have to box the fight of all fights, the fight of his life. If, in my opinion, he's going to be competitive, because it's less of how I rate Craig Richards and more of how I rate Dimitri Bivol. I believe Dimitri Bivol to be one of the most underrated fighters in the sport. I think, he is a sensational talent. You only have to look at the job that he's done on Joe Smith, the job that he's done on Jean Pascal in the past. He's an excellent fighter. So I feel that it would rank as one of the great upsets, in my opinion, if Craig Richards is able to get that upset win. Shakan Pitters, yes, good, capable British level light heavyweight. Dimitri Bivol, in my opinion, a pound for pound level fighter. Forget world class. I think he's one of the very, very best fighters in the sport. And Craig Richards, look, it's a fight. It's a 2-horse race. One punch can change anything, and he can punch, Craig Richards. he'll never get a better opportunity than now. He's coming off a big win in a fight again that he entered as the underdog against Shakan Pitters and produced a very, very good performance. You're in this sport, this crazy sport of boxing. You go through all of the sacrifices for these opportunities. It's a pay-per-view card. You're fighting one of the best, if not the best, light heavyweight in the world. I'm sure Artur Beterbiev and your crazy Russian accent would have something to say about that. But it would be a monumental upset, in my opinion. I can't see it. I do see Dimitri Bivol winning the fight, probably late stoppage. I think Craig Richards is a very tough fighter. I do have concerns over potentially late in the fight. Dimitri Bivol, not known as a big one-punch guy. As we all know in boxing, it can be the sustained one-sided beatings that can, take some miles off the clock with regards to fighters. Hope we don't see something like that with Craig Richards. And I hope he gives a good account of himself. Of course, it would be fantastic if he's able to spring the upset, be brilliant for British boxing, and of course him. But I do make Dimitri Bivol quite a significant favourite in that fight. And then, hopefully, we can get him versus either Joe Smith in a rematch or the fight that I want to see, the fight that I think a lot of boxing fans want to see, is the all-Russian light heavyweight showdown with Artur Beterbiev.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Bivol is where it's at, without a doubt. That's the two best 175-pound fighters on the planet at the moment, who will bring dynamite to the ring, but also great boxing brains as well. So, yeah. I mean, listen, Spider's got a chance. Big fan of Craig Richards as a person as well. I mean, let's look. Umar Sadiq went out to Russia, didn't he? No one gave him a chance in hell, and he put on a great performance, admittedly with short notice as well. So, but Craig Richards has been in his training camps doing everything that can be asked of him. He's got his Rocky moment here. Let's hope he's able to do it. It's a really tall order, but it's the stuff dreams are made of, and hey, dreams sometimes do come true.
Moving along, it also sees the return of Chris Eubank Jr. Against Marcus Morrison. I put it to Kalle Sauerland, of course, promoter now of Chris Eubank Jr., that the fight's not been met with a lot of praise. I think a lot of people are very critical of the level of opponent, with all due respect to Marcus Morrison, who's a very capable fighter, but I feel like you're always going to be in the position to be criticised when you're Chris Eubank Jr. You're talking about Gennady Golovkin, you're talking about Canelo Alvarez, Billy Joe Saunders, Ryota Murata, and then, with all due respect, end up fighting somebody like Marcus Morrison. Do you see any potential for the upset here?
Again, if I had to put money on it, then no, you're going to go for Eubank Jr. here. What I would say is that Eubank Jr. has a lot of talent, a lot of grit, a lot of power, not one knockout punch power. It's accumulation of swarming vicious
physically
blows.
very strong.
But he's not been active, and he doesn't take all the opportunities that are put his way. And off the back of that and of Andrade, I'd like to see Williams Eubank Jr. And that'd be a great tear up of sorts. Again, it will come down to money. Eubank Jr. has been a very prudent businessman. I'm not sure how much he's getting paid for this, and he's maybe seeing it as an easy fight to get quick money. And I don't know, whatever reason he's taking it for, it was a bit of a surprise for me, because 1 minute he was talking Triple G and this, that, and the other, and now we're here. So if he wins emphatically, then yeah, maybe he's going to get the attention again from the higher ranked contenders. But I think there's a lot more of Chris Eubank Jr. to see.
I spoke to Kalle and I kind of made the point about everything that we've discussed there, and he said to me that he hasn't boxed. He's boxed a round and a half. He boxed Matvey Korobov. I remember watching it at about 7 a.m. Saudi Arabia time, because it was the night of Ruiz Joshua 2 and we were in Saudi. I remember watching it on some, I was going to say dodgy stream, definitely not. Particularly all of the Triller lawsuits that have been coming down in the last 24 hours. I definitely didn't watch on an illegal stream. But he got a round and a half in against Matvey Korobov. That's the last time we've seen him box. So, of course, he needs... I think it was unrealistic to expect him to go in straight against a Gennady Golovkin or somebody of that ilk. But when you're talking about that and you go in against somebody like a Marcus Morrison, you're always going to have that. People are always going to bring that up. I think... provided he comes through successfully against Marcus Morrison, which I'm sure Marcus Morrison and Joe Gallagher will both have their own views on that, it's got to be a big fight next. I know Kalle has been discussing potential fights with Gennady Golovkin, Ryota Murata. Another fight he's been talking about, Kell Brook at middleweight. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, Kell Brook's not a natural middleweight by any stretch. He hasn't been active for a while. Kell Brook will get smashed. and that's it. And it's just not a fight we want to see. But between that and Brook against Khan, it's just not attractive at all. When I interviewed Andrade for the Ring about 3 weeks ago, I'd mentioned about Chris Eubank Jr. and his honest response was, if he's got a title or the money's big enough, then yeah, I'll fight him, and that was it. But it wasn't like, yeah, I really want to fight Chris Eubank Jr. It wasn't that at all. So yeah, I think Chris Eubank Jr. has had some great matchmakers in the past that have been able to open doors for him, and I think he's going to need to knock on their doors again to be able to get a big name up after this fight, assuming he wins it.
It's going to be interesting because I have no interest in the Kell Brook fight at all. I don't see what that does for anybody. I don't see what it does for Eubank. I don't see what it does for Kell Brook. While you're mentioning kind of Khan Brook, I'd much rather see it. While it's belated and way past its sell-by date, I would much rather see Amir Khan versus Kell Brook than Kell Brook getting in the ring with a middleweight in Chris Eubank Jr., who's of course boxed as a super middleweight fairly recently as well in his last few fights. I would like to see Chris Eubank. The fight that I really would like to see him in with was the fight that we were expecting him to have when he was with Al Heyman, which was Jamal Charlo, who's of course the WBC middleweight champion. If not him, the Gennady Golovkin fight I think is a great fight, particularly now I feel as though we're kind of in the twilight of Gennady Golovkin's career. I think that's a very interesting, more even fight than it would have been all of those years ago when ironically Kell Brook was the man who took his place to box Gennady Golovkin. But I think there are a lot of interesting fights, and I think style-wise for Chris Eubank Jr., we've mentioned the fact that very physically strong, got a good engine, got his dad's chin, he can take a shot really well. He's going to be in some really entertaining fights, and I feel like those should be there for him at 160 pounds without him having to drag a welterweight who in his day Kell Brook was a fantastic fighter. Okay, he's probably outgrown or had probably outgrown 147 pounds coming towards the end of his career, but again I put it to Calla that his last fight was at 147 pounds. And the first real clean shot that was landed by Terence Crawford ended the fight. I mean, Terence Crawford is a great fighter, but he's a welterweight. And he's also a welterweight who's come up from lightweight, super lightweight, welterweight. Whereas Eubank is a fully fledged middleweight who's boxed at super middleweight. So I'm not interested in Eubank Jr. versus Kell Brook. I do hope that this is not a precursor to that. I feel that if he comes through against Marcus Morrison, looks good, gets the stoppage, and then, moves on into a title fight or a world level middleweight fight or even super middleweight fight, then I think we can kind of forgive this one. If the plan is to get past Marcus Morrison and then fight Kell Brook, then I just don't see it. I don't really understand what anybody has to gain from that fight.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, the other bit of noise that Eubank Jr. was making was saying that he wants to take on Canelo. I don't know if that's because Billy Joe's fighting him and he's constantly trying to get a one-upmanship on him, or it's because he knows that if he fights Canelo he's going to get a shitload of cash. But I think that there are some good fights out. The Charlo fight would be good, but I think Charlo's now looking to lock horns with Andrade. Here we go. 3 different versions of how to pronounce it.
Demetrius.
Yeah.
Boo boo.
DA. Yeah. But in the meantime, Chris Eubank Jr. could go in risk of missing the gravy train on a number of fronts here.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll be financially secure regardless of what happens. But I would like to see he's in that kind of career. He's in that stage of his career now where he's right there for those fights, or should be right there for those fights. I mean, he beat James DeGale, I think February 2019. So January. God, that's a long time ago. And we're kind of here now, and he's boxing. He'll be 3rd or 4th on the card against Marcus Morrison. I don't know if it's a 10-rounder. So yeah, an interesting career trajectory. But look, he's now, obviously, it's Calla Sauerland, but it's now Wasserman Boxing, so that's a significant heft behind him. He's very marketable. I'm sure he's not going to struggle for opportunities, but yeah, going from here, I would like to see him challenging those big names at 160 pounds. Or, if not, maybe somebody like a Sergey Derevianchenko. Somebody like that to really test the waters of, Derevianchenko's a good fighter, but he's been beaten by Daniel Jacobs, he's been beaten by Gennady Golovkin, beaten by Jamal Charlo. That, I think, is a good barometer. If Eubank Jr. can come through that fight, then that, to me, says he's ready to be challenging those champions at 160 pounds. I think Derevianchenko would be the best win on his ledger by far. I think DeGale had probably seen better days by the time that he boxed Chris Eubank Jr. But yeah, always a lot of intrigue around Chris Eubank Jr. And here we are talking about him, even though he's 3rd, 4th on the card in a fight that is attracting a lot of criticism, but he does have that name, he does have that star quality, and I think everybody would just like to see him in these big fights moving forward. Elsewhere on the card, we have the return of the Madman, Scott Fitzgerald. Now, it's been a while since we've seen Madman Fitzy in the ring. We've had a couple of false starts on his return and his comeback. We've obviously seen a number of outside of the ring issues with him. But by the looks of things, those are now no more, and he returns this weekend. We mentioned that 154-pound scene domestically is very, very vibrant. There's a lot of great fights for him. There's the Fowler rematch. There's the Cheeseman rematch. Those guys, I think, probably has something to do with the fact that he's been out of the ring for a little bit of time. Are very, very interested in that fight, and of course, getting back there, or getting revenge for losses that they've had. But good to see him back in the ring because there are a lot of good fights out there for Scott Fitzgerald. Yeah,
Fitz, good fighter. The Fowler fight where everyone thought that Fowler was just going to absolutely run him over. Everyone, including Fowler, I think, was totally surprised by that. I remember watching it thinking, this is not how I thought Scott Fitzgerald was going to be boxing. No, I wasn't, no.
Good, great atmosphere.
Go on, rub it in.
We haven't had crowds in so long, I was just dreaming of it.
But yeah, I mean, that was a really, really, really good night. And I think Scott Fitzgerald, the longevity of his career is not going to be going sort of past 30, 40 fights, so to say, simply because that he's always in a war and he cannot be taking that level of punches. After a while, something has got to give. And if he has a rematch with Fowler, again, it'll be probably a 12-round tear-up, and there'll be a lot of punches being exchanged between them. And he's fit to easily take a punch to give one, and sometimes lay a trap specifically for that. The annoying thing is he's got really good boxing skills, and I'd like to see him use those more and not have to take punches. So, but I'm delighted to see him fight again, and I hope he's going to get active more than once in 2021 and going into 2022. And there's a few little revenge fights in there for him to grab, and some great domestic rematches as well. So again, Britain is treating the boxing fan to some absolute corkers. I'd probably say it's one of the first times in a number of years that we've had that many great domestic matchups at 50-50 level.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, there's a lot of fights out there for him. Cheeseman was in here a couple of weeks ago saying that that's the fight he wants. I know Anthony Fowler wants to fight everybody, but he wants to fight Scott Fitzgerald and get that rematch. All being well, Scott Fitzgerald comes back and he looks well, and he gets active, gets some good rounds under his belt. What fight would you like to see for him next?
I'd like to see the rematch.
Which one?
With Fowler, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I really would.
It had a great build-up, didn't it?
The stick between them was fantastic. And I can't remember how much at the time Fowler was already peddling the CBD, but I'm sure that the war of words on Twitter would probably have a hashtag CBD jelly babies with it, or whatever it is afterwards. But those two bring a hell of a lot of spice with them at media conferences, and the funny thing is they're actually both really nice guys, but they create personas to piss each other off royally, and they do a great job of doing it. So that's a fight I'd like to see. I know that both fights would come in immaculate condition, and that's again more pay-per-view worthy than Parker Chisora.
Maybe we could get the rematch on Parker Chisora 2 on the card.
There we go. That's the one.
But yeah, and also a great fight as well. I mean, a lot was obviously made about the build up, and it was very fiery between the two of them. But the fight delivered. The fight was a brilliant fight, and I feel that. Obviously it's difficult to really see where Scott Fitzgerald is at in his career. Probably better suited to make this call on May the 2nd. But I do feel that Anthony Fowler has shown good improvements under Shane McGuigan. I feel he's a lot more languid and loose now. His boxing is flowing a little bit more. I think Shane had spoken openly about his desire to speed him up and speed up his feet and his hands. And I think Anthony Fowler is in a good position regardless of the Scott Fitzgerald fight. I think the Ted Cheeseman fight is potentially there, but we've mentioned all of the other names potentially at 154 pounds. So hopefully Scott Fitzgerald comes back, he makes a statement, he gets people talking about him again for the right reasons, and we can get one of those big fights. Final one for this Saturday's card, Campbell Hatton. Two fights, 2 pay-per-view cards. There we go. What did you make of his first fight? We've obviously caught up with him recently. What did you make of his first fight?
Nice. I liked it. Cool, calm, calculated. Opposite of his dad. It was. It's good that he's got Matthew Hatton training him. I mean, in the nicest way, because firstly he's stepping out of the shadow of his dad, but also his dad had a fighting style which was very raw certainly in those early days. And although Campbell's already shown he's got sort of big punch power, it's great that he's showing his boxing skills off first. And Matthew Hatton was more of a technician than a bang out artist like brother Ricky. So I'm really impressed. He looks like he has about 1% body fat on him. He's taken the game very, very seriously indeed. I'm not sure what percentage of that is due to the fact that he is Ricky Hatton's son, and the pressure is on his shoulders to not fail. But listen, he's a young lad. He's done really well in his first fight. I'm looking forward to his second one, and I hope he has a fantastic career.
Yeah, I mean, we caught up with him a couple of weeks ago. We went to the gym in Stockport, to Matthew's gym, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. A lot of people will point to the fact that he's Ricky's son, and that's why let's be honest, if his name was Callum Johnson, would he be boxing on 2 pay-per-view cards with kind of his amateur, which was, his amateur career was okay, was good. It wasn't, we've spoken about Vasyl Lomachenko and Katy Taylor, so it wasn't at that level. Would he be boxing on these 2 major platforms? The answer is no, of course. But that comes with its own pressure, being Ricky Hatton's son. I mean, we would have seen all over Twitter, all over social media after his last fight, people kind of queuing up to say, well, he's not as good as his dad. And, that's always going to be there for him. But he seems aware of that. He seems comfortable-ish and okay-ish with it. I think certainly a pressure that he could do without. It was very telling moment of our interview where he said that he got out on he practiced the ring walk in his room over the years and walking around, and Campbell Hatton, he said, and once he got there and he heard Blue Moon, his knees started to go together and stuff, which is, you're going to get that regardless of who your dad is or what your amateur background is when you're making your pro debut. But when you add the fact that your dad was one of the most loved British fighters of many a generation, and you're boxing on these pay-per-view platforms, it's going to be difficult. And I don't think, by his own admission, he doesn't think that we saw necessarily the best of him in his debut on the Povetkin White 2 undercard. He said he felt okay for the first couple of rounds, but then he said, again, this is all new for him. He actually boxed in front of crowds, which is not a luxury that everybody's had, certainly in the period of time, the last 18 months. But he said once he heard the crowd singing "There's Only One Campbell Hatton," he started to get nervous and he started to load up under the lights. And these are all things that a lot of debutantes, regardless of their background, will all experience, but it's magnified more so for him when you consider the stock that he comes from. And I feel like he's got a very good head on his shoulders. He is certainly a chip off the old block with regards to the Hatton wit and the Hatton dry sense of humour. But yeah, I think people need to take their time with him. I think he's very fortunate to follow in the slipstream of Conor Benn and what Conor Benn has done. I mean, we mentioned earlier about his fights with Cedric Peno. Again, he was somebody who in his early portion of his career was constantly compared to his dad. He's starting to come away from that now, to step out from Nigel's shadow, and it can't be easy. I mean, boxing, difficult enough sport to make it as it is, but when you're going in with that added pressure of having that family name on your back, that must make things so much more difficult.
Oh yeah, I mean, you got to remember as well. So we mentioned Chris Eubank Jr. before as well, and at the time when he was a little kid, he had a silver spoon in his mouth, didn't he? His dad was still boxing. There was millions of pounds coming into the family. Different situation now. Eubank Jr. is the one holding the financial flag. With Ricky Hatton's gym as a comparison, say Matthew Hatton's. Ricky's got these incredible punch bags that I think he got imported from Las Vegas, which there's a handful of them on the planet. And as Matthew Hatton's gym is spitting sawdust, and it's time to work in here. Whereas Ricky's, I think you've got all the boxer-size classes to go on, and as well as a professional gym and all that. So Campbell has to step away from that, step away from the fact that he's got a legacy of millions of pounds ahead of him by way of what his dad's done. But also step away from looking at his dad's world title cabinet and saying, right, I'm starting from scratch. Go in there, do it. It's natural to have nerves. It's natural to be nervous. And it's natural when they call out there's only one Campbell Hatton to get the shitters. Of course it is. So it's experience that will help him to move forward against all these things. There's little bits of his toolkit which are expanding all the time. I think also he became a father when he was 17, and that does give him an added layer of maturity. If you start looking at other fighters who are out there who are 20 years old, a lot of them are loose cannons. But I think because he's got a little kid and he wants to make sure that kid can see his dad growing up doing the correct things, maybe not doing some of the stuff that Ricky had done, etc. And he's got the media spotlights on him absolutely everywhere. He's keeping himself squeaky clean. And I think he's got a hell of a lot to offer as a person and as a boxer going forward. I think he could end up by being the unknown role model, which we weren't expecting.
I think it's going to be a long road ahead for Campbell Hatton, but yeah, I'm intrigued to see it. I think he's got good head on his shoulders. I think, you know, he said of his own admission he'll never feel as nervous as he did for that debut. You look at, and you know, you're just looking for progression at this stage. When you have the lack of experience that he's got, just need a better performance than he performed in his first fight, and then you slowly move up the levels. Of course, I think they will be very slow with him. I think it's a long-term build. But having, you know, Ricky in obviously looking over and overseeing things, as well as Matthew, his trainer, I think they're in a good place. And I think they're in a good position to build him. Okay, I think we're about there now for our Chisora-Parker preview podcast. I just want to thank you again for coming in and saving my bacon today after a little bit of a mix-up between myself and Mr. Oladipo to start the day. So thank you so much, Paul, for popping down and joining the Boxing Social podcast.
My sincere pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Okay, from me, Rob Tebbutt, from him, Paul Zanon. Thanks very much for stopping by and watching episode 17 of the Boxing Social podcast. Remember, also available on Spotify and iTunes. If you haven't already got it, The Ghost of Johnny Tapia by this man, Paul Zanon. Excellent read. Go check that out soon. Thanks very much for stopping by.